They didn't know how to die. Nothing knew how to die because the living God had created it all. And so when everything began to learn how to die, it was looking to Adam. And Adam had no help. He had a form of godliness now, but he had no power in him. His spirit had died. And the only thing he had left was his soulish man. His mind, his will, and his emotions. And it don't take long till you begin to forget what you used to know. This is how people backslide. Once they start dabbling in sin, and once they start tasting sin again, and once they start doing this, soon your spirit will start to darken. And it'll start getting darker and darker. And when it finally gets to the point you can't hear God anymore, it's not hard to make the jump to yield to your fleshly appetite. Because your soul is still connected with everything in the creation. And you start to cry for things. Now, this living soul was not meant to operate this way. But man learned how to die. Now, I'm trying to make some points here out of this. So before man sinned, his soul cried. His soul cried, but his appetite was clean. His appetite was only to do the will of his Father. And so his soul cry would call for things into his circle until the whole creation would hear that soul cry and begin to operate to bring that to pass for that man. But it was a pure cry. And so Adam didn't know anything else but good. He hadn't sinned yet to know good and evil. He only knew good. So his soul cry cried for good. Now, I want you to watch this. When Adam sinned and he fell, the creation was made subject to the fall. They didn't just fall, they were made to fall. Because Adam was above them, and when he fell, everything beneath him fell with him. So now watch this, the creation only knows still one thing. Interact with your living soul. That's all it knows. It interacts with your living soul. And if your soulish man begins to cry loud enough, and you get to where you want something bad enough, as we say, your soul keeps crying and crying. The creation only knows one thing. Start trying to arrange this to come to pass. Start trying to arrange this to come to pass so that the man, his soul can be fed and his appetites can be fed. The problem is the fallen man's appetite is only evil. So the soul begins to cry for it, and the creation starts trying to bring it to him. I remember when John Lake, I was reading after him, and he talked about a soul cry. He said this. He said when he was a boy, his dad, I believe it was his dad, was a huge in insurance, in things like that, and he was absolutely. He was successful. His dad worked for this guy. And so they took John Lake. He got to go up to the top floor of this huge office. And he said, I'll never forget it. He said when he was going up there, the elevator opened into the office. And so he said, I remember when it opened and I stepped into this plush carpet and I looked around at all the dark woods and the deep wood that the office was made of. And I walked over to the desk and looked down at the desk, and in mother of pearl was this man's name inlaid on his desk. And he said, I looked at that as just a little boy. And he said, my soul started crying for that. He said, I wanted that. And he said he just cried to have that. And he said he didn't, I don't even know how much he realized, but a child can cry for something and not feel guilty about it. He wanted to be a success like this man. And this was back, turn of the century before, way before of that century. So he comes in there. He said as he grew up, he began to get in the same business. And before you know it, he became, in his day, man, you're talking about, we're not talking about the 1920s. We're talking about, right in the turn of all of that. And all of a sudden, he starts making, he would have been considered a multimillionaire probably now. He started making money like that, and so one day the company said, we want to show you something. They made him close his eyes, and they put him in an elevator, and they took him up to this floor, and when it opened, they told him to open his eyes, and it opened into this office, and he stepped in this carpet, and he looked around at all the dark woods that everything was made out of, and he went over to the desk, and there was his name in mother of pearl across the top of the desk. He had never told people he wanted that I could read, but he said his soul cried for it. And he took note that the soul cry of a man will draw these things to him. So before Adam sinned, this is what the creation was designed to do, to interact with his soul. And Adam would release his intentions through his words. And the creation, even the plants, would pick up on the intention coming out of that word. And it would begin to shape everything around him. But Adam's intentions and his desires were pure. So everything was a paradise because it was so pure. Now, after Adam sinned and he fell, nothing changed in the soulish realm and it was an advantage and a disadvantage to man. But it was never made to be a disadvantage. But it was something. See, people say, well, maybe if he couldn't use his soul like that, all of this wouldn't have taken place. If God hadn't have made the man, spirit, soul, and body, and the Lord God breathed into the nostrils the breath of lives, you see what that means now? Lives. And the man's soul became a living soul to interact with lives and all of that. If he hadn't have done it that way, when the man sinned and his spirit died, God would have had no way to contact him. But his soul was still living. So he could talk to him through the creation. He could speak to him in whispers. He could talk to him sometimes in dreams. And so these things were set up this way, and it wasn't a disadvantage, it was an advantage. But man used this living soul to just bring everything to the ground. And the creation don't know any better. It groans and travail together, waiting for the sons of God to reveal themselves to it. Because that's what they interact with. So Satan seeks to use this living soul in you. He wants to use that. And so think about this. He'd get a man so depressed, so darkened, get him down and out, discouraged, with no hope, and the man's soul will start craving some disaster. He'll become so dark, he'll start releasing words to the creation, words of death, words of despair, words of failure, words like that, and it's coming out with these intentions. And the creation starts moving. Now the book of James says this, it says the tongue is a fire, and it sets in motion the course of nature. It starts nature moving. That's how it does it. Nature is corresponding and interacting with the soul of a man. And the intentions of the soul is released in his words. And so Satan seeks to use this. And he will kill you with it if he can. Now,